Tonight we're working on Chapter 3 in our JavaScript textbook, and if you look at the list of topics here, which seems pretty brief, but there's actually a lot of information to learn. We're going to learn three very important programming concepts here, and really, if you have not had the programming stuff before, and I know I keep saying that in these lecture videos, these are important concepts that you're going to see repeat in your other programming classes. So let's take a look at what they are. And the first topic is going to be arrays, and then we're going to look at code repetition, which is basically loops, and then decision statements, where we make conditional statements that allow us to choose one path versus another. So those are the three topics. All right, I have my textbook up on screen here. I also went ahead and I launched my authoring environment. I'm going to be using Visual Studio again because it handles JavaScript nicely. And let's begin by just jumping into the book and taking a quick look. So here's a little bit more detailed list of the stuff in the chapter. Storing data in arrays. We're going to look at while loops, do-while statements, for statements. We're going to look at continue, if, else, and switch. And then also at nesting decision statements. Now how far we'll get to that tonight or within this material is really going to kind of depend on how things go. This is our last night of class, and I am reserving the last half of class so that we can look at everybody's website projects and kind of do like a wrap up on the course. So we'll only go as far as time permits, and that might not be the whole chapter, but we'll give it a good try. All right, so the first topic we're going to be looking at is something called an array. Now, if you think of how a variable works, a variable, I always use the analogy of a box, and the one thing that works well at showing what a box is Excel. So I always use this when I start to demonstrate array concepts so that people get an idea of how an array functions. So I'm going to zoom in significantly here. But usually if you're creating a variable, you give the variable a name. So you might call it like number 1. That might be your variable name. And then you're basically, by virtue of giving it a name, you're creating kind of a box that goes with it. And I didn't want to do that. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get my borders to kind of highlight the fact that I have this variable, that's the name for it, and then there's an empty box where I put the stuff, right? Now an array is very similar to that. The difference is an array will have one name, and then it will have index positions, and then it will have the boxes that correspond. So watch what I'm doing here. With all the borders that I'm putting in. So really what happens, an array is a method for giving a bunch of variables that are related one name. That's kind of a good way to think of it. And then they'll have index values, and then you'll have multiple boxes to store things. So if I put something in this position, and it should be a number since it's a number array, right? The way I would refer to this is going to be number array position 0, as opposed to just using one variable name. So this structure is pretty logical, because if you start to look at really what's happening, it starts to kind of lay out like a spreadsheet. What a coincidence that I'm doing it in a spreadsheet, right? Where we really have a named construct, and there's really cells that match up with the data, and then we can use those index values to find the information. But we only have one named construct. Okay, so that's what an array looks like in terms of what kind of data structure it is. If you're comparing it to a variable, And and if I was to try to replicate this sort of a structure with variables, I mean, basically, I would have to do this kind of thing, right? For example. But they each have their own name. They're all declared separately. Here they're declared once, and we have index values to refer to the items within. So, I mean, if I were to sum up all of arrays in a nutshell, I mean, that's kind of the whole concept. It's kind of interesting in that capacity. So what they're going to show you here is, what kind of stuff do you put in an array? Usually you put things in there that are related to each other, right? So what they're looking at here as an example is they have an array name which they're going to call news sections. So you think of like a newspaper. And what kind of sections does a newspaper have? Well, they have the world and local and opinion and sports. So those would be the items that sit inside that array. And they make sense to sit inside the array because they all relate to the array itself rather than being separate entities. It's not like news sections and TV sections and radio sections. It's just all news sections. Now, the way that you declare an array, you can do that a number of different ways. You can do what they call a literal declaration, and this is an example of it. So in this literal declaration, what they're doing is they're giving it a name. Notice they're still using the var keyword to indicate that it's a variable, because it's still a variable construct. We can change what's in memory stored with it. So whatever that name is, I can actually put square brackets, enter items in, separated by commas, and close the square bracket. And so if I were to, let's say, take this thing and put it into that structure, name would be, I'm trying to get it all on the screen here, the name would be news sections, and the values would be world, comma, local, comma, etc. And just so you know, the ... means and so forth. It doesn't mean you put ... in there. And that's kind of a programming convention. So if you ever see a book and it's like, well, I typed ... and my code doesn't work. Well, that's because that's just shows you that there's code missing. Doesn't mean that you necessarily need to type it in. All right. So this is how you would take an array and directly populate it with values. So if I were to do that kind of thing here, and I'll just give you an example right inside of Excel if I can get Excel to cooperate with me here. I might say var number array equals, and then to populate the array, I would put in my square brackets, and I would say 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, etc. So you can go on and on for as long as you want. And then if I were to translate this to the array, it would be 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5. And that's what we call like a brute force populating the array with literal values. It can be strings, it can be numbers. And yes, you can mix them. It's not really good practice, but you can mix them. Caution though, other programming languages you cannot. JavaScript is kind of an oddball that way. All right, here's an example. Well, I guess the author was thinking just like me, where he does exactly what I said, and this time he's using strings. Notice the double quotes around them. And that creates the array and forces values into it. Now the interesting thing is you can keep going and going and going, right? So that's kind of what the structure means. But you can also pull those values back one at a time or populate them one at a time. So here he's got an example where he's saying news sections square brackets 1. So just by virtue of the fact that he has the name followed by square brackets with a number inside, it's pretty indicative that you're working with an array. And almost every programming language uses square brackets to indicate it. Guess what the exception language is? Visual Basic. They use parentheses. All right. Now, the interesting thing about that is if you're working with those array positions like they're indicating, notice where the index value starts. 0. Computers start counting with 0 because 0 is the first single digit of our number system, not 1. So if I wanted to, let's say, either populate or extract this piece of information from position 0, I could do something like this. I could say number array, position 0 equals whatever I need it to equal. In this case, okay, let's just do what's already there. It equals that. If I have a position in my array, which I do, that hasn't been populated yet, like position 3, and I made this statement, then 3 would get that value. Now here's the fun part. How many array positions do we have populated? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 are populated with values. What's the index number that matches? 3. So an array that says num array square brackets 3, and 3, that index value position is the last value, there's 4 things in that array. Do you see how that works? Subtract 1. So that's something, I know that's a little odd at first, but always remember computers start counting at 0, and I know that that's what the guy's example is here. So now you don't have to populate everything. It makes more sense to populate the spots in order, but you can actually leave positions empty and force something into a particular position just like that. I don't think that's really good practice, but it's possible to do, because you can take a position and clear the contents, and then in essence it becomes undefined. All right, if you take a look at this little example, here the guy is basically creating an array. Notice what's inside the array. Nothing. Okay? We have no number of positions defined. We are just basically stating it is an array. And then we go in, and then one position at a time, starting with 0, we start putting values in. And yes, remember I said you can mix data types in here? Yes, you can do this. You can say string, you can do an integer, you can do a floating point value, and then you can do a Boolean. Those all work. Now, I'm not sure what his point of doing this is right here, but if you think about an array structure, it really kind of lends itself well to a lot of different data that you might be manipulating. So for example, a calendar, now granted this isn't all in a row, but you can agree that a calendar that might be called August 2016 very conceivably has 31 array positions. So what's the highest index value? 30. See how that works? So if I wanted to get to the last day, I subtract a number because the first one goes in position 0. I do see some programmers try to fudge that. And the way they fudge it is they leave position 0 empty and then start at 1. You got to be careful of that, though. If you do that, make sure you know that you did that. All right, so we're going to proceed and start to work on this exercise, and you guys should have downloaded the data files that come from the book, and I have those here. So I went to Data Files, Chapter 3, and then what I'm going to do is I actually have a separate folder where I'm going to work. So I'm just going to copy this. And now that I'm saying that, I think I may have already done that. So let me see. No, I guess I didn't. So I'm going to copy all these files, and I'm going to paste them into my folder here. Now, just to kind of show you, this is the Web 1 folder that I've been working on all along. I had a Unit 8 folder, and then I made a JavaScript Chapter 3 folder inside of it. So if we go back and we start looking at the instructions here, it says open that file in your editor. Now, since I'm using Visual Studio, and I'm hoping that you guys kind of do that too, and if not, I guess use some other program, that's fine. In Visual Studio, I'm actually going to do open website, and I think I showed you guys this last time. All right, and then all I have to do is find that folder that holds the project. So I'm just going to keep expanding my tree here. I know it's in Web 1. This is my work folder, Unit 8, JavaScript Chapter 3, and all I'm doing is highlighting that folder. And then we say open. All right, so you see everything opened up here. And on the right-hand side in Solution Explorer, you can see all the files that are part of the project. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to double-click the calendar HTML to open it up for editing. It is being a little sluggish right now, but there we go. And that's really a good idea, is to get in here and just look at the code even before you begin anyhow. There are some things in here that are pre-created for us, and the thing that I want you to notice is how he created media queries right inside of a link to a CSS file. So he actually has two CSS files, one for handheld devices and one for regular devices. So handheld being mobile phones and tablets. So that's why he's got max device width 999 pixels and minimum device width of 1000, and then he runs different CSS for both. And if you flip back to the book, basically the goal is that we're going to have a calendar that looks like this in our regular browser and a calendar that looks like that on our phone and tablet. Now the interesting thing is whenever you're doing media queries, you can also trigger them by just making your browser window narrower. That's how they work. So you don't even need a phone technically to test it, but it's helpful. All right, so he's got all this stuff pre-created for us. It's not a bad idea to just go ahead and launch the page. And I'm always going to be running it without debugging at this point, if you get this message. If you click that, it's not a big deal. All right, and this is what our calendar looks like. So basically what he did is he created a nice background and the structure, he put a logo in and some menu items, and basically created all the rows and columns for us, but it's going to be our job to populate it. Okay? So he took some of the footwork out of it for us. Thank you. All right, at the top of the document, you should put in your name and today's date. Go ahead. And then step 3 is exactly what we were just doing. It says scroll through the document so you can kind of get used to what's in it. And it says the article element contains a table consisting of 5 rows and 7 columns. All right, 5 rows and 7 columns. Notice that each one of the data cells, the TDs, has an ID that coincidentally matches the date to help make it unique. All right, we already went ahead and we opened it up in a browser. And we confirm that it looks just like that. And it says return to your text editor, open a new document, and then enter the following comment, entering your name and today's date where indicated. So you guys go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to Visual Studio, and to create a new document in Visual Studio, and I guess I should probably be smart here, and this looks like it's going to be a JavaScript file, right? So, oh, it tells us right here, it's a JavaScript file. All right, so I'm going to come up here to the root of my project. So be mindful of where I'm clicking here. So the root of the project is where the bold name is, with the bold title. So I'm clicking on that. Then I'm going to right click, and I'm going to add. We're going to add a new item. But remember, the way that Visual Studio works is if it recognizes what kind of files are common for the kind of work that you're doing, or if it's something you've done a lot recently, it will appear down here at the bottom. And JavaScript file is one of them. But let's say it did not appear there, then you would just choose Add New Item, and see what it says, JavaScript file. But notice that it also is trying to attach a programming language to it. If you have to pick C#. We're not putting any C# or Visual Basic in our code. We're just creating a JavaScript file, and you can see there's no real attribute that goes with it. Now we are going to be renaming that file, and I guess before we rename it, we should probably know what that name is going to be. It's going to be tt.js. So I'm going to right-click right inside of Visual Studio. If you're not using Visual Studio, I have to do this in a file folder, and I'm renaming that file tt.js. He wants us to go ahead and put all this stuff in. So if you want to do that, you know what? I'll do it too. And of course, we're bringing over line numbers that we don't need. Put your name here and the date there. It says below the comment section, enter the following code to declare the days of the week. So notice this is a perfect structure for an array. And just to make sure that you guys can see it okay, I'm putting it all in one line. So we're declaring a variable array named days of the week, and then we're just putting all the days of the week inside of it as strings. Just to reiterate the concepts we were talking about, Sunday is position 0, position 1, position 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is 7 values. From 0 to 6 is 7 values. Right, next piece of code. Oh, it looks like we have a whole bunch of stuff here. We're going to be building an array. Let's try that again. Of course, there will be cleanup here. It looks like opponent, so this must be some sort of a sports listing. And it is okay to do it this way. It does ignore the white space. I mean, I would probably try to combine it into some shorter lines. But notice the array has repeating values, right? So sometimes it looks like they're playing Lightning a lot, and it looks like they're playing Combines a lot. It looks like they're playing Sodbusters a lot. Sometimes 3 days in a row. It seems like a baseball schedule, right? It's usually how baseball works. You play one team several days in a row, and you might get a day off here and there. So they do have stuff that's listed for off. Now, I'm wagering that if I look at these and start counting, right, it looks like they have 4 in a line. Well, that's 8, 11, 14. How many values do you think are here? All right, so if that's the case, that's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, plus 4 is 25, plus 4 is 29, and 30. Maybe there's a line with 4 that I missed. So yeah, this line's got 4. So 31 values in that array. What I would suggest is if you are populating an array like this, that you might like indent the stuff a little bit. Maybe not that much. Something like that. So we have an array for days of the week. We have an array for opponents. I'm doing Control S to save. That's why the line just turned green here. All right, now it looks like we have another one to do. And this I'm going to have to do in pieces, it seems, because it spans a couple pages. So here we're going to come up with a new array that's called game location. And we can also guess here that this also has 31 positions in it. Control S to save. Then I'm going to create a couple of more blank lines here. Okay, now it says save the file as a text file with the name ttjs. We were a little preemptive and figured that out. And then add the following line of code to your calendar.html file just above the closing body tag. So let's go back to the editor. Here's our calendar.html file, all the way to the bottom, just below, or just above, excuse me, the closing body tag. We are going to put our script file. This is going to allow the page to completely load first, and then the JavaScript will load afterwards. Remember, one of the reasons he likes to do this is because that way the page loads really fast. We're not waiting for the JavaScript to load first. You know, really there's not a lot of JavaScript here, but you know, I think we mentioned the scenario that if you happen to have a file that's pulling in a couple JavaScript files that are like 10,000 lines each, that sounds like a lot, but that's not really a lot, it will slow you down, so the user will get frustrated. So this is a technique. You can put this at the very top in the head section of the document. It'll still work just fine. Just keep that in mind. All right. All right. Now the point is, make sure you save everything, and I'm hitting this little save all icon, 2 little diskettes. And then I'm going to go back to the browser where this is still running, and I'm going to do a refresh. Nothing happened because we didn't tell it to do anything. We just created a JavaScript file, but we can make sure that it did do that by just going to the bottom of the page here. You see how it's got that file listed down here? Now I'm using Chrome, so I'm also able to actually click on it and go see that indeed it worked. And believe it or not, you can, anybody who's using JavaScript out on the web, you can look at their JavaScript. They can't hide it. Because it's client-side code, the client needs to be able to see it to run it. So sometimes you go to a website and you go, wow, that's a really cool effect. How do they do that? And you can find it in your JavaScript. You can find it in their JavaScript. Now, I'm not telling you to copy it, but you can get inspired. And one thing you'll actually learn, you guys, is if you're trying to copy JavaScript from somebody else's website, JavaScript's just one part of it, right? Because they got CSS that can come into play. They got different classes and IDs than you have probably in different page structure. So copying somebody else's code doesn't mean it's going to be easy to implement. But it can give you a head start, at least conceptually. All right. Let's continue on. Everybody good so far? All right, so now they're giving us a little bit of an example of how you would actually access a variable and how you would apply it. So if you look at what you're doing here, they actually say that they're breaking down the page into a couple of sections. Notice they have section 1, section 2, and section 3. And what they're doing is they're setting up the variables with corresponding names. And what they're doing by virtue of this is they're pulling in the entire element. So they're attaching this name to this object. So my guess is if I look at my HTML file, and maybe my guess is wrong, and apparently it is, if we were working, yeah, because that's an example and that's not actually a thing, but if we were working with a page that had an item with an ID of section 1, and then I apply document get element ID to this variable, every time I use that name, I'm referring to that item. So that way, I can take that item, so section 1 head, and then say .inner HTML, and then I can populate the code inside that element. You see in the stream here? With whatever is in this array position. So if I had a paragraph called section 1, and I apply that to section 1 head, and I say section 1 head.inner HTML, and then I go to my array and extract the data from position 0, inside that paragraph is now what was in position 0 of that array. Does that make sense? Seems a little convoluted. Like, why would you go to all that trouble? Why don't you just put it in there right away? Well, because you can program it. That's the whole point. You can do it dynamically. And then if you set up a structure that's generic like that, you can change the value to whatever you want. In fact, you could set it up so that if somebody changes a value in your array, it automatically populates the page. So you see the power of that? Rather than writing static HTML that can't change. All right, so now we're going to go back, and it's going to show you a bunch of keyboard shortcuts here. And what they're trying to show you is the console. Now, we've already seen how to do the console, right? You guys all know how to get there? Well, if you don't, here's the list of ways you can get there. My favorite way to get to the console, frankly, is just to right-click anywhere on the page, do an inspect, and then this tool comes up and you can click on console. Same technique works in Internet Explorer, Edge, Opera, Firefox, and Chrome, and Safari if you turn on developer tools. They all allow for that. All right, so they want us to activate the console. And what they're telling you it should say, and I'm going to do a refresh here, is it should have a listing of things on the page. Now, I'm not getting the same kind of output the author is getting. Are you guys getting the same output?
No, I'm not doing anything on console.
All right. Okay, so they're just saying these are CSS errors.
Oh.
Okay. Well, here's my answer to the author. Don't code CSS errors. All right. Okay, but what they are showing us, notice this little thing. It says days of week, right? 1. If you are in the console, and you should be, do you notice how the cursor is flashing? And we did create in our JavaScript a variable array called days of the week. So what this is showing you is that the console, I can actually type JavaScript commands. Notice how it even figured out what I was typing before I was done? And then I'm going to do the square brackets just like they do in the book. So days of the week position 1 will yield Monday. Isn't that cool? So if you guys aren't familiar with what console means in terms of computers, it means a command line. So JavaScript does have a command line interface, and what it allows you to do is to check things. And this is an example. We can check to see that it's finding the array and that it's pulling the data out correctly. Like sometimes you run a page and it will say, well, it should say Sunday. Why is it saying Monday? Right? Oh, days of week, position 0 is Sunday, because that's the first position in the array. Right? 0 comes first. All right. And then what they want you to do is kind of randomly start typing in some of these commands. So what I'm just going to grab a couple. We already did days of the week. I think you guys get it. And there's one I saw there that we have to go back and do. So I'm going to say opponents 30, and it says off. So if I go to my JavaScript and opponents 30, which position is it? We know there's 31 positions, so it must be this one, right? Nope. It's this one. Because it counts from 0 to 30. So the one that they did that was kind of interesting, I thought, and really kind of demonstrates, if I can get back to my browser. Here we go. Remember, they did days of week, and then one of the ones the guy typed in is 7. So which day should that be?
6.
You're thinking right, but you're saying... All right, well, if I say days of week 7, which means it's going to go to my array, it's going to count to
Will you
7...
start Sunday as the start of the week, or?
Yeah, so you're thinking that because weeks repeat, we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then if I go to 7, it should go back to Sunday? This is the array. And because that position is basically what we call out of range, when I press enter here, it's going to say undefined, because it just doesn't exist. Now, if I lived in some universe where I could add one, like maybe if I lived on Mars, we could add a day, then it would pull up if there's something in that position. So that's a good example too. So if you want to play with these, it's kind of a helpful little tool. All right. The next little thing that they're showing here is that you can modify stuff in an array by just simply declaring the variable name, the array position, and then equals to whatever the new variable is. So you guys, I think I already showed this to you, so I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Here's another thing that you can do, is you can use the console to check things. Sometimes you're creating arrays and you know exactly how big they are. Other times you write code that creates the array for you. So I'm running this little method here, days of week dot length. That's a built-in method or function. And it says 7. Remember, the last index value is still 6. But it is true, it's 7 positions. But if we had something that was writing code and it was, let's say, adding positions on its own, and we wanted to see how many positions are in there, we could come to the console, type it in, and see what it comes up with. And it's a way for us to check things. And it wants you to keep repeating that process for each one of these. And if you do opponents and game location, they should each come back with 31. And I'll just try one of them. All right. Another way that we can work with arrays is to use what we call an array object. And this is not really, functionally different than how we've been working with arrays so far, but it shows you that you can create the array as a thing. So whenever you hear the word object in computer programming, just think of it as some sort of an entity without actually putting anything into it. And then we use this keyword here, new. Now this is a little fuzzy, and I know that, especially if you're new to programming and you have not learned object-oriented programming before. But those of you that are staying in program sequence and are taking Java next semester, some of you maybe, you are going to discover that that's how we create new objects inside of a programming language. So here we're actually creating an array object formally. And this is the technique you use. You still give it a name, you use the new keyword, and then you use an array because that's what you're building. And then you're also not putting any values into the array, you're just creating it. All right, so now they're going to give you an example of how you access stuff in the array. And all right, so they're saying, assume that you're working with this web page with this code. So you got an H1, you got ordered list, and then 3 list items. All right, so they're showing you here that you can pull in items from that ordered list by tag name. So what's a tag name? Well, LI is the tag name. Right. HTML tags. So you can pull them in that way. Now, why would that be useful?
Can you do like combine them? Like let's say, how you can
With CSS?
Yeah.
Not in that kind of statement. You can only choose one. That's a great question, though. Yeah, unfortunately, not with this approach. But notice what you can end up doing with that is that you can get all the things on the page that are LIs in the second position. Okay, so what it's really telling you is that this ordered list, and if you think about it, is an array-like structure, right? We have a thing that's bundled all together as an ordered list, and there are 3 list items within it. So if I said what he says here, get tag elements or tag name li position 2, which one of these LIs is it? You have to assume it's 0, 1, 2, 3. It would choose this one. Right? All right. All right, so let's play with that a little bit. All right, so back to our file, and it says on the command line of the browser, okay, so they actually want us to do this. Now, of course, I got to make sure I copy. I suppose that's important. Go back to the console and just paste that command in. So you notice what that did is it went to the HTML file. So if we look at that HTML file, it found the list items, right? In this case, the book showed an ordered list. This is an unordered list. No difference. It went to, excuse me, position 0, right? Which is the first position. And it pulled back the inner HTML from that position. So it extracted the stuff in between the LI tags, and then it put it up on the screen. You can see it matches.
So what if you had another unordered list in the document?
That's an excellent question. You know how you test it?
Right, no?
You write another one and see what happens. Yeah, because hypothetically, right, which one is it pulling back? I think that what it'll do is it'll just count each one separately. Yeah, it'll just keep going through a sequence. It's kind of interesting, though. Yeah, so some of that comes down to programming logic and thinking through the problem. All right, now they want you to repeat that process a few different times. Okay, so I'm going to actually stop us here. We're 45 minutes into the video. This is a great place to stop for a break, so that's what we're going to do. And then we'll come back with a fresh video.